If you're watching this, it means I survived, or maybe I didn't. Maybe you're just hearing the last words of someone who thought they could outsmart the darkness. Either way, I need you to listen. Not because I want sympathy or even understanding, but because there are things out here you wouldn't believe, and I'm not sure I should even be telling you this. But if I don't, someone else might end up where I am now, alone, staring out at the Texas night, praying the rules are enough. I never planned to inherit anything from my family, let alone a ranch in the middle of nowhere. My grandfather and I weren't close. He was the kind of man who sent Christmas cards with nothing but his signature, and even that felt like a stretch. When the lawyer called, I thought it was a scam. "Congratulations," he said. "You're the sole heir to the McAllister Ranch." I laughed. I hadn't seen my grandpa since I was 12, and even then, he barely looked at me. But the will was real, and so was the property. Acres of land, a house older than the state itself, and a legacy I never asked for. I flew down to Texas expecting dust, heat, and maybe a few awkward memories. What I got was a key, a battered pickup, and a letter taped to the fridge. 9 rules, written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. At first, I thought it was a joke. Some weird old man ritual, or maybe a test to see if I'd actually stick around. But the rules weren't funny. They were specific, paranoid, and the last line chilled me more than anything else. Follow these, or you won't last a week. I know how this sounds. Inheritances, family secrets, creepy old houses, it's all been done before, right? But I promise you, nothing could have prepared me for what I found on that ranch. If you think you'd do better, or that you'd just leave, you're wrong. The rules aren't just for show. They're the only thing standing between you and what's out there. Let me tell you exactly what happened from the very first night. The drive out to the ranch was almost cinematic. Miles of open road, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. The sky was a hard, endless blue, and the sun beat down on the fields until everything shimmered. I passed through a town so small it barely had a name, just a faded sign and a gas station with a single pump. The clerk inside looked at me like I was a ghost, or maybe just another city kid who'd get lost before sundown. I tried to make small talk, but he just handed me my change and muttered, "Be careful out there." I laughed it off, but his eyes didn't. The land changed as I got closer. The trees grew twisted, hunched over like they were hiding secrets. The grass was tall and wild, waving in the wind like it was trying to warn me away. I rolled down the window, expecting the smell of earth and cattle, but there was something else, something sharp and metallic, like the air before a storm. When I finally turned onto the dirt road that led to the ranch, my phone lost signal. The world shrank to the crunch of gravel under my tires and the distant call of a hawk. The house appeared suddenly, rising out of the grass like a memory. It was old, but not in the charming, fixer-upper way. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the windows stared back at me, dark and empty. Still, there was a strange kind of peace to it. The kind you feel in places that have been left alone for too long. I stepped out of the truck and let the silence settle around me. For a moment, I almost convinced myself this could be a fresh start. A place to figure things out. Maybe even reconnect with a past I'd never really known. But then I noticed the details. The mailbox was stuffed with letters, all unopened, some of them yellowed with age. The grass near the porch was trampled, but not by boots or hooves, by something with claws. I found a set of tracks in the mud, too big for a dog, too deep for a coyote. They led around the side of the house and disappeared. Beneath the porch, I tried the front door. It stuck, then groaned open like it was warning me to turn back. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust, and something else, something sweet and rotten. The furniture was covered in sheets, and the walls were lined with old photographs. My grandfather stared out from every frame, his eyes hard and distant, even as a young man. I wandered through the house, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every floorboard creaked. Every shadow seemed to move just out of sight. In the kitchen, I found a mug still half full of coffee, the surface scummed over with mold. It looked like someone had just stepped out, but the silence told a different story. Outside, I spotted a barn at the edge of the property. The doors were chained shut, A heavy padlock rusted in place. I rattled it, half expecting something to rattle back. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of laughter, or maybe it was just the creak of the old windmill. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. New places always feel strange at first, right? But as the sun started to dip behind the trees, the shadows grew longer, and the peace-side felt turned brittle. I didn't know it yet, but the first rule would save my life that night. I found the list of rules taped to the fridge, written in my grandpa's shaky handwriting. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged in places, but the words were clear, each one pressed into the page with a kind of desperate force. At the top, in block letters, it said, "Read this first." Underneath, 9 rules, numbered and underlined, each one stranger than the last. Rule number 1, never go outside after sunset, no matter what you hear. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the punchline. Was this some kind of rural hazing ritual? A way to scare off city kids who thought they could play cowboy for a weekend? But the handwriting was unmistakably my grandfather's, and there was nothing playful about it. I glanced at the window, where the last light was bleeding out of the sky, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. Rule number 2, if you hear someone calling your name from the fields, do not answer, no matter whose voice it is. That one made me pause. I tried to picture my grandfather, the man who never raised his voice, writing something like this. Was he losing his mind at the end? Or was there something out here that made even a hard man like him afraid? Rule number 3, the barn stays locked. Do not try to open it. Do not look through the cracks. I thought about the heavy padlock, the way the doors seemed to lean away from the house, as if the barn itself was trying to keep its distance. I'd seen enough horror movies to know this was the part where the audience starts yelling at the screen. Don't go in there. But this was real, and the rules were starting to feel less like a joke and more like a warning. Rule number 4, if you find a dead animal on the porch, burn it before sunrise. Do not bury it. Do not touch it with your bare hands. I felt my stomach twist. The tracks in the mud, the trampled grass suddenly, they didn't seem so harmless. I tried to tell myself it was just coyotes, maybe a stray dog, but the words, "burn it before sunrise," echoed in my head. Rule number 5, the phone will ring at midnight. Do not answer. Unplug it if you have to. I looked over at the old rotary phone on the wall, its cord tangled and dusty. Who would be calling out here at midnight? And why did my grandfather think I'd be tempted to pick up? Rule number 6, if you see lights in the woods, close your eyes and count to 50. Do not look until the lights are gone. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to make sense of it. Lights in the woods? Was he talking about hunters or something else? The rules were getting more specific, more desperate. Rule number 7, if you wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, lock your bedroom door and wait until dawn. Do not open it for anyone. I glanced down the hallway, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were, how easily sound traveled in this old house. The idea of footsteps slow, deliberate made my skin crawl. Rule number 8, never leave food out overnight. If you forget, throw it away without touching it. I thought about the mug of coffee, the way it had gone untouched, left to rot. Was that why he'd left it there? Was he following his own rules, even at the end? Rule number 9, if you see your reflection move when you don't, cover every mirror in the house and don't uncover them until morning. That one stopped me cold. I looked at the small mirror above the sink, my own face pale and uncertain. The idea of my reflection moving on its own, smiling, waving, doing anything I wasn't made my heart race. At the bottom, in smaller letters, my grandfather had written, "These rules are not a joke. I know you think I'm crazy, but if you want to live, you'll follow them. Don't test them. Don't ask why. Just do it." I set the paper down, my hands shaking. My rational mind screamed that this was all nonsense, the product of a lonely old man's paranoia. But another part of me, the part that remembered the way the grass moved, the way the neighbors stared, wasn't so sure. I laughed at first, but that night, I heard the knocking. That first night, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I tried to distract myself, unpacking, scrolling through old texts, anything to keep my mind off the rules. But the silence pressed in, thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional groan of the settling wood. I told myself it was just an old house, that every creak and sigh was normal. But as the sun bled out behind the trees and the last light faded from the windows, the air changed. It grew colder, sharper, as if the darkness itself was alive and watching. I made a show of locking the doors, double-checking the windows, even though I felt ridiculous. I left the kitchen light on, the list of rules still taped to the fridge, its words burning in my mind. I tried to laugh it off, but every time I glanced at the clock, I felt a little more uneasy. The hours crawled by. I lay on the lumpy mattress in the guest room, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and the distant howl of something I hoped was a coyote. Around midnight, the house began to settle in earnest. The pipes groaned, the floorboards popped, and somewhere in the walls, something scratched a slow, deliberate sound, like claws dragging along the wood. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The scratching stopped, replaced by a faint whisper, so soft I thought I was imagining it. My name, drawn out and breathless, drifting in from the direction of the fields. I froze. Rule number 2. If you hear someone calling your name from the fields, do not answer. No matter whose voice it is. It sounded like my mother. Or at least, it sounded like how I remembered her warm, gentle, coaxing. Come outside, sweetheart. Just for a minute. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, that she'd been gone for years, but the voice was so real, so familiar, that for a moment I almost believed it. I swung my legs off the bed, feet touching the cold floor, and took a step toward the window. Then I remembered the rule. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears. The voice grew louder, more insistent, until it was almost a wail. Please, just open the door. I need you. My hand hovered over the doorknob, sweat slicking my palm. I almost opened the door. If I had, I wouldn't be here to tell you this. Instead, I stumbled back to the bed, heart hammering, and waited. The voice faded, replaced by silence so deep it hurt. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds until dawn. But the night wasn't finished with me. Around 3, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging, as if someone was shuffling just outside my door. I remembered rule number 7. If you wake up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, lock your bedroom door and wait until dawn. Do not open it for anyone. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling with the lock. The footsteps stopped right outside, and for a moment, I could see a shadow under the door, a pair of feet, too long, too thin, standing perfectly still. Then a voice, low and guttural, whispered, "Let me in." I pressed my back against the door, barely breathing, and waited. The shadow lingered, then slowly slid away, melting into the darkness. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the list of rules, listening to the house breathe around me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get in the truck and never look back. But something kept me rooted: curiosity, fear, or maybe just the stubborn hope that it was all in my head. In the morning, I found something on the porch that made me realize this was no joke. The thing on the porch was a rabbit, or what was left of one. Its fur was matted, its eyes wide and glassy, and something had arranged its legs in a way that wasn't natural. I remembered rule number 4: burn it before sunrise. Don't touch it with your bare hands. My stomach turned, but I did what the rule said. I found an old shovel in the shed, scooped the thing up, and tossed it into the fire pit out back. The flames caught quickly, and the smell was worse than anything I'd ever known. I stood there, watching until nothing was left but ash, and tried not to think about what would have happened if I'd ignored the rule. Later that morning, I decided I needed answers. Or at least, I needed to see another human face. The nearest neighbor was a mile down the road, a squat, weather-beaten house with a porch full of empty rocking chairs. I knocked, half expecting no one to answer, but the door creaked open and a man stepped out. He was old, maybe older than my grandfather, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that never quite met mine. "You must be McAllister's kin," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Didn't think anyone come back after what happened." I tried to play it cool. "Yeah, I'm his grandson. Just got in yesterday. Place is something else." He snorted, spitting into the dust. That's one way to put it. You find the list yet? I blinked. You mean the rules? Yeah, I found them. Is that some kind of local tradition? Or? He cut me off with a sharp shake of his head. Ain't no tradition. It's survival. You follow those rules, you might make it through the week. You don't. Well, you're not the first to inherit that place, you know. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? Has something happened to other people? He looked past me, out toward the fields, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Folks around here don't talk about it. Not if they want to sleep at night. But your granddad, he knew what he was doing. Kept to himself, never caused trouble. That's how you last out here. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. You really believe all that? The voices, the lights, the rules. He fixed me with a look that made my skin crawl. Don't matter what I believe. Matters what's out there. You city types always think you can explain things away. But some things don't care if you believe in them or not. They just are. I wanted to ask more, but he turned and started back inside. Just remember, he called over his shoulder. Sun goes down, you stay inside. And if you hear your name, you keep your damn mouth shut. The door slammed, leaving me alone on the porch. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty rocking chairs, wondering how many other people had come looking for answers and left with nothing but more questions. On the walk back, the land felt different. The wind was colder, the shadows deeper. I kept thinking about what the neighbor had said about not being the first, about things that didn't care if you believed in them. My skepticism was starting to crack, replaced by something colder and sharper. That's when I started noticing the changes around the ranch. The days blurred together after that. I tried to keep busy fixing the fence, clearing brush, anything to keep my mind off the rules and the way the house seemed to watch me. But every night, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned bruised and purple, I felt the weight of the list pressing down on me. I followed the rules, every single one, even when they made me feel like a fool. I unplugged the phone before midnight, covered the mirrors, locked my door tight. I burned anything I found on the porch, no matter how small or harmless it looked. I didn't answer the voices, even when they sounded like people I missed. But the rules started to feel less like protection and more like a cage. I caught myself staring at the barn, wondering what could possibly be inside that needed such a heavy lock. I watched the woods at night, searching for the lights my grandfather warned about. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. Maybe the neighbor was just a superstitious old man, and my grandfather had lost his grip on reality long before he wrote that list. It was a stupid mistake. I'd been up late, reading through my grandfather's old journals, trying to piece together what had happened to him. I made myself a sandwich and left the plate on the counter, too tired to care. I told myself I'd clean it up in the morning. Rule number 8, never leave food out overnight. If you forget, throw it away without touching it. I woke up to the sound of something moving in the kitchen. Not the creak of the house settling, but a wet, slithering sound, like something dragging itself across the linoleum. My heart hammered in my chest as I crept down the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The kitchen light was on, flickering, and the air was thick with the smell of rot and something metallic. I stopped in the doorway, breath caught in my throat. The plate was gone. In its place was a trail of black, oily slime, leading from the counter to the back door. The door was open, swinging gently in the wind, and outside, the grass was flattened in a wide, unnatural circle. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it, something hunched and wrong, crouched at the edge of the yard. Its skin was slick and gray, stretched too tight over bones that didn't fit together right. It was eating, tearing at the plate and the crumbs with a mouth that split its face in half. I can't describe what I saw, but I'll try. Its eyes were too many, clustered along its jaw and forehead, blinking in different directions. Its hands, if you could call them, that were long and jointed, ending in claws that scraped the dirt. It moved like it was learning how to use its body for the first time, jerky and uncertain, but every so often it would stop and cock its head, listening. I realized, with a sick jolt, that it was listening for me. I stumbled back, trying to stay quiet, but the floor creaked under my weight. The thing froze, every eye snapping toward me. It let out a sound high and wet, like a laugh and a scream tangled together, and started to crawl toward the house. I slammed the door and locked it, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The thing threw itself against the wood, over and over, making the whole house shudder. I pressed my back to the door, whispering the rules like a prayer, begging whatever was out there to leave me alone. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it started. I waited, barely breathing, until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. When I finally opened the door, the yard was empty. The only sign anything had happened was the trail of black slime, already drying in the sun, and the plate, shattered in the middle of the circle. I spent the rest of the day scrubbing the floor, burning the shards, and checking every lock and window twice. The rules weren't just superstition. They were the only thing keeping the chaos at bay. I realized then that the safety I'd felt was an illusion, a thin line between order, and something hungry waiting just outside. After that night, I started to understand why my grandpa left so suddenly. After the thing in the yard, sleep became a memory. I spent my nights pacing the house, checking locks, whispering the rules to myself like a mantra. The days were no better. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far. Every gust of wind carried voices I didn't want to hear. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, just like my grandfather. But fear has a way of sharpening your senses, and in that clarity, I realized I needed answers, real answers, not just warnings scribbled on a piece of paper. I started searching the house, desperate for anything that might explain what was happening. The attic was the last place I looked. It was cramped and hot, filled with the smell of old cedar and dust. I found boxes stacked to the rafters, each one labeled in my grandfather's careful hand. Most were filled with the detritus of a long life, tools, faded photographs, yellowed letters from people I'd never met. But at the very back, hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt, I found a battered metal lockbox. The key was taped to the bottom. Inside, I found a stack of journals, their covers cracked and stained, and a handful of cassette tapes, each one labeled with a date. The earliest journal was from 1972. The first entry was short. First night on the ranch. Heard the voices. Wrote down the rules. Hope it's enough. I read for hours, piecing together the story of a man I thought I knew. My grandfather had come to the ranch as a young man, full of hope and stubborn pride. The first few months were uneventful, just the usual struggles of rural life. But then the voices started. At first, he thought it was the wind, or maybe a trick of loneliness. But the voices grew bolder, calling his name, whispering secrets only he could know. He wrote about the first time he saw the lights in the woods, how they moved in patterns that made no sense, how they left the animals restless and the air thick with dread. The rules weren't superstition. They were hard-won, carved out of years of terror and trial. Each one was born from a mistake, his or someone else's. He wrote about neighbors who vanished, about things that crawled out of the barn when the lock rusted through, about the night he answered the phone at midnight and heard his own voice on the other end, begging for help. He wrote about the price of survival, the way the land seemed to demand sacrifice, the way the rules changed over time as the threats evolved. But there was more. Scattered through the journals were references to others' letters from people in other towns, other states, all describing the same phenomena. Lights, voices, rules. Some called it a curse, others a test. My grandfather hinted at a network, a loose collection of people who shared information, who tried to keep the darkness contained. He called them the Watchers. There were mentions of meetings, coded messages, warnings passed down through generations. It wasn't just this ranch. It was bigger, older. Something that moved from place to place, always hungry, always looking for cracks in the rules. The tapes were worse. I listened to one, the tape hissing and warbling as my grandfather's voice filled the room. He sounded tired, older than I remembered, his words slow and deliberate. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I tried to keep it contained, but it's getting stronger. The rules are changing. If you find the 10th rule, don't read it. Don't even look at it. Some things are better left unknown. I rifled through the journals, searching for any mention of a 10th rule. I found a page near the end, the paper torn and stained. There, in my grandfather's handwriting, was a single line, Rule number 10. The rest was scratched out so violently the paper was nearly shredded. Underneath, in shaky letters, he'd written, "Not safe. Not safe. Not safe." I sat there for a long time. The journals spread around me, the tape still humming in the player. The image of my grandfather, the stern, silent man from the photos, was gone. In his place was someone desperate, haunted, willing to do anything to keep the darkness at bay. I wondered how many others had inherited rules like these, how many had failed, how many had simply disappeared. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my life, I was part of something much bigger. If you're reading this, it means I made it through the night, or maybe I didn't. Maybe this is just another warning, another echo left behind for the next poor soul who thinks they can outlast the darkness. I used to think the rules were a prison, a set of chains forged by fear and superstition. Now I know they're the only thing standing between order and chaos, between life and whatever waits in the fields. It started with the phone. Midnight on the dot. I'd unplugged it every night since I arrived. But tonight, the cord was plugged back in, the receiver off the hook. The phone rang, shrill and insistent, echoing through the house like a scream. I stared at it, heart pounding, remembering my grandfather's voice on the tape. If you find the 10th rule, don't read it. I let it ring, counting the seconds, refusing to answer. On the 5th ring, the voice on the other end started to whisper my name, my real name, the one only my mother used. I pressed my hands over my ears and waited for it to stop. Then came the lights. At first, just a flicker at the edge of the woods, like someone waving a lantern. Then more dozens, maybe hundreds, weaving between the trees, moving in patterns that made my skin crawl. Rule number 6. If you see lights in the woods, close your eyes and count to 50. I shut my eyes tight, counting out loud, forcing myself not to look. The lights pressed against my eyelids, burning red and white, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I lost count at 37, started over, desperate not to slip. When I finally opened my eyes, the lights were gone, but the house felt smaller, the darkness thicker. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging, just like before. Rule number 7. Lock your bedroom door and wait until dawn. I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door, twisting the lock until my fingers ached. The footsteps stopped outside, and a voice, my grandfather's voice, whispered, "Let me in, kiddo. It's cold out here." I pressed my back to the door, tears streaming down my face, whispering, "You're not him. You're not him." The doorknob rattled, then fell silent. I thought I was safe, but then I smelled at the sharp, metallic tang of blood, the sweet rot of something dead. I remembered rule number 4. If you find a dead animal on the porch, burn it before sunrise. I crept to the window, peering through the curtains. There, on the porch, was a fox, its body twisted, eyes wide and staring. I grabbed the shovel, hands shaking, and ran outside, the cold biting through my skin. I scooped up the fox, careful not to touch it, and tossed it into the fire pit. The flames roared to life, casting wild shadows across the yard. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the darkness, something tall and thin, watching from the edge of the trees. Back inside, I found the kitchen in chaos. The fridge was open, food scattered across the floor. Rule number 8. Never leave food out overnight. I grabbed every scrap, every crumb, and threw it all into the trash, tying the bag tight and tossing it outside. As I did, I heard scratching at the back door, a wet, hungry sound, like something trying to claw its way in. I locked the door, heart racing, and backed away. The barn door rattled, chains clanking in the wind. Rule number 3. The barn stays locked. Do not try to open it. Do not look through the cracks. I ran to the window, watching as the door bulged outward, something inside slamming against the wood. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the rules, to trust that the lock would hold. Then, the voices started. Not just one, but dozens, maybe hundreds, all calling my name, all begging me to come outside. Some were familiar, my mother, my grandfather, friends I hadn't seen in years. Others were strangers, their voices twisted and wrong. Rule number 2. If you hear someone calling your name from the fields, do not answer. I pressed my hands over my ears, humming to drown them out, refusing to listen. The mirrors were next. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, just for a second. My reflection smiled, even though I wasn't. It raised a hand, waving slowly, mockingly. Rule number 9. If you see your reflection move when you don't, cover every mirror in the house. I grabbed a towel, throwing it over the glass, refusing to look again. The hours stretched on, each one longer than the last. The house shook, the walls groaning under the weight of whatever pressed against them. Shadows crawled across the floor, reaching for me, whispering promises of safety, of rest, if I'd just let them in. I clung to the rules, repeating them over and over, each one a lifeline in the storm. At some point, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the way I had been. I was angry at the thing that had taken my grandfather, angry at the rules that had stolen my peace, angry at myself for ever doubting. I stood in the center of the house, surrounded by darkness, and shouted, "You can't have me. I know the rules. I know what you are." The voices fell silent. The lights faded. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the house was still, the air heavy with expectation. Then, slowly, the first light of dawn crept through the windows, painting the walls gold. The darkness retreated, slinking back into the woods, leaving me alone and shaking, but alive. But even after surviving, I knew it wasn't over. Dawn didn't bring peace. It just brought a different kind of silence, the heavy, exhausted hush that settles after a storm. I walked the house in a daze, checking every lock, every window, every mirror. The towel stayed up for days. I didn't care if it looked crazy. I'd seen what waited on the other side of the glass. I wish I could say the rules stopped mattering after that night, that the darkness gave up and left me alone. But the truth is, the rules are the only reason I'm still here. They're not just for the ranch. They're for me. For anyone who comes after. I see that now. The price of survival isn't just fear, it's vigilance. It's knowing that you can never let your guard down, not even for a second. I started noticing things I'd missed before. The way the shadows in the fields never quite matched the trees. The way the wind sometimes carried voices that didn't belong to any living thing. The way the neighbors avoided my eyes, crossing themselves when they thought I wasn't looking. I realized the ranch wasn't just haunted by what lived in the dark, it was haunted by everyone who tried and failed to follow the rules. I tried to leave once, packed my bags, drove until the gas tank was nearly empty. But every road led me back to the same dirt driveway, the same sagging porch, the same list of rules taped to the fridge. The ranch doesn't let go. Not easily. Maybe not ever. I started writing everything down, just like my grandfather did. Journals, tapes, notes hidden in the walls. I don't know if anyone will ever find them, but I have to try. I have to warn whoever comes next. Because I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. The rules are spreading. I've seen stories online other places, other people, all with their own lists, their own warnings. Some of them sound just like mine. Some are even worse. If you ever get a letter from a lawyer about a ranch in Texas, burn it. Don't ask questions. Don't get curious. Curiosity is what the darkness wants. It's how it finds new cracks, new ways in. I used to think I was safe as long as I followed the rules, but now I know better. The rules are just a truce, a thin line between what we understand and what we can't. I hear things at night, still. Sometimes it's footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes it's the phone ringing at midnight. Sometimes it's just the wind whispering my name. I don't answer. I don't look. I don't break the rules. Not anymore. Maybe you think you'd do better. Maybe you think you'd find a way out. I used to think that too. But the ranch is patient. It waits. It learns. And it never, ever forgets. But there's one last thing I need to tell you. I know what the 10th rule is. But if I told you, you'd never sleep again. You've listened this far, and maybe you think you'd want to know everything. Maybe you're the kind of person who needs to see behind every locked door, who can't stand an unanswered question. I get it. I was like that once. But there are some things that don't want to be known. Some rules that aren't meant to be spoken, not even whispered in the dark. The 10th rule is one of those. I found it eventually. Not in the journals, not on the tapes, but hidden in the walls, scratched into the wood where only someone desperate would look. My grandfather tried to erase it, but the words bled through. I read it once, and that was enough. I can't unsee it. I can't unknow it. And I can't risk passing it on. Not here. Not to you. Maybe someone out there knows more. Maybe you've heard stories about other ranches, other rules, other places where the darkness presses in, and the only thing holding it back is a list, a warning, a desperate plea. If you do, leave a comment below. Share what you know. Maybe together, we can piece together something bigger, something that makes sense of all this. Or maybe we'll just add another layer to the mystery, another thread for the darkness to pull. I've read your theories before. I've seen the stories you share, the warnings you pass around like talismans. Maybe you think this is just another creepypasta, another campfire tale. But I promise you, some stories are warnings. Some stories are maps. And some stories are traps. So, if you've ever heard a voice calling your name from the fields, if you've ever seen lights moving where they shouldn't, if you've ever found a list of rules that made your skin crawl, don't ignore it. Don't get curious. And whatever you do, don't ask about the 10th rule. Because some rules are written in blood for a reason.